In 79 AD, in the city of Pompeii, a man named Marcus Caecilius Jucundus made a financial deal that was recorded, witnessed, signed, sealed, and kept for future generations thanks to a volcano. And oddly enough, this paper is still around. You can see it. This is a receipt. The receipt shows that a person was sold for 625 denarii. At that time, it was about the same as the cost of a good mule, a little more than a good horse, a lot more than a chicken, which cost about 1 denarius. We'll talk about the chicken later. The number on this receipt isn't what I want you to notice. It's the way it looks. The document that recorded this transaction is almost exactly like a receipt for grain, wood, or amphorae of olive oil in terms of its structure. The same people who saw it happen. The same words in law, the same way to file, the same volcano that accidentally kept it safe for 2,000 years. It wasn't a secret that the Roman slave economy was bad. It was the economy of Rome. It had the same legal systems, the same commercial instincts that built aqueducts and roads, and the most advanced financial system the ancient world had ever seen. It was, in the most unsettling way, normal. And the day a person entered that system, the day of the sale itself, with all the details and steps, was, from the economy's point of view, an incredibly well-organized event. I'm going to tell you what that day was really like. Not from a moral point of view. We all know it was wrong, so I don't need to stand here and explain that to you, but from the point of view of the system itself. The system is one of the most revealing things Rome ever built, once you know how it really worked. And some of what it shows will surprise you, including the part with the chicken. We'll get there. The wait is worth it. There were specific slave markets in Rome. The main one in Rome was close to the temple of Castor and Pollux in the Forum, which is to say, in the most central, busiest, and most prestigious part of the world. Not hidden away in a bad part of town. In the Forum, right there between the temples, the law courts, the money changers, and the politicians who were giving speeches about Roman virtue. There was a set time for the market to open, days in particular, hours that are normal, with permanent platforms, display areas, and administrative staff. The infrastructure showed that this was a busy business that needed to be organized. Depending on where they came from, the people being sold came to the market in different states. Recent war captives, who were the biggest single source of supply during times of military expansion, might come in large groups, hundreds or thousands at a time, by land or sea, and the Roman sources describe the conditions of these transports in the same flat, bureaucratic tone they used to talk about moving grain. It was normal for businesses to expect, plan for, and budget for losses while they were in transit. I want to stop there for a second. Losses while in transit. If you see losses in transit on the shipping paperwork for a grain cargo, it means that some of the grain got wet and spoiled. The same phrase used for people means something completely different, and the Roman government used both without changing their tone. That is something you should know about Rome. People who were born into the system were born into it. The children of enslaved women were legally the property of the mother's owner from birth. No capture, no transportation, and no dramatic moment of entry. It was just a birth record that put a new person in the asset category before they could even understand what that meant. In some cases, people sold their own family members into the system because they owed a lot of money. Roman law didn't stop this from happening, but it did set rules for how it should happen, because Roman law was very practical about the relationship between money and people, and a small but historically interesting group of people had sold themselves. Free adults who, because they were poor or in debt, or just thought that having a guaranteed roof and food supply was better than being free without either, had chosen to enter into permanent or semi-permanent service arrangements that the law saw as the same as slavery. All of these people from all of these places ended up in the same physical space. The cataster was a raised platform where people were put on display for inspection. In the theatrical sense, the cataster was not a stage. It was a commercial display system that let customers look at the product from many different angles in the most efficient way possible. Roman sources use the same tone to talk about this as they would to talk about a good way to show off pottery. New people were marked. A placard around their neck or on their feet told where they came from. This was like a product label because people thought that where they came from could tell them a lot about the product's quality. In the Roman business world, some areas were thought to have certain skills, temperaments, or physical traits. This was not scientifically sound. It was like brand recognition for people in the past, and buyers used it to decide what to buy with the same confidence they had when buying wine from a well-known area. Greeks were valued for their ability to learn and run things, Syrians for their business skills, Nubians for their strength, Gauls and Germans for their strength. Roman business people thought very poorly of Cappadocians who lived in what is now central Turkey. There was even a standard Roman joke about the 3 worst things in the world, and Cappadocians were one of them. I won't list the other items because the joke hasn't aged well in any direction. The point is that the categorization system was very detailed, sure of itself, useful for business, and mostly made up, just like most commercial categorization systems, no matter what time it is. And on the day of the sale, a specific order of events happened that was required by law, was common practice, and was written down in such detail that historians have an amazing paper trail. Roman law said that you had to tell the truth. This is truly one of the more interesting and revealing things about the Roman slave market. The Edict of the Aediles, which were the magistrates in charge of regulating the market in Rome, said that sellers had to tell buyers about any known problems with the people they were selling. Not optional to reveal, not a best effort disclosure, legally required, with buyers who find undisclosed defects after the fact having options, such as the right to return the purchase and ask for a refund in some cases, a return for one person. According to consumer protection law, I need you to think about how strange that is for a moment, because it is both completely horrible and completely logical. According to Roman commercial law, the same laws that protected buyers from being sold fake grain also protected them from being sold fake people. The system didn't make a difference. A deal was a deal. The flaws that had to be revealed were specific and grouped. Physical health problems, of course, long-term illness, injury, or disability, but also behavioral history. A person who had tried to escape before had to be labeled as a flight risk. Someone who had hurt themselves in the past had to be revealed. People had to tell the truth about any past crimes they had been convicted of. And then there were the groups that had to be disclosed because they affected commercial value in ways that Roman buyers thought were important and Roman law thought were okay to protect. A person who had been a gladiator had to be disclosed because their background as a gladiator could have an effect on the market value in both directions. It could be helpful for some buyers and a problem for others. In any case, the buyer had a legal right to this information. It was necessary to tell someone that they had tried to kill themselves before. The law says that this was a known risk to the asset's ability to continue. I know how cold that sentence is. I am talking about how the Romans thought about the law, not agreeing with it. And this is where the Roman specifics get almost surreal. There was a category for disclosing whether the person had been used as a substitute for legal flogging. It seems that wealthy Romans often paid slaves to get corporal punishment for them, so the law had to decide if this kind of service was something that could be made public. Consider the bureaucratic framework necessary to formulate that regulation. Someone, either in a Roman Senate committee or an aedile's office, had to have a conversation in which they said, "We need a disclosure rule for the professional flogging substitutes." Then other people agreed, and then it became the law, and then it was put into action. There were many things about Rome: not understaffed, the buyer, agents working for the buyer, or sometimes professional evaluators, people whose job it was to figure out how much other people's stuff was worth, did the physical inspection before the sale. This was a specialized skill with a known market rate. Teeth were looked at because they could tell how old someone was and how healthy they were in a world without birth certificates. The state of the muscles was checked. People had to walk, turn, and show their range of motion on the cataster because physical mobility was a major factor in how much buyers were willing to pay for physical labor. Calluses and signs of skilled work were looked for on the hands, checked the eyes. People who were being sold for skilled or administrative jobs, like the educated Greek secretary, the trained doctor, or the experienced household manager, had a different kind of inspection. They might be tested by being asked to read, do math, or show that they know a lot about a certain subject. A skilled doctor could charge a lot more than a person who was physically fit but not very good at their job. The price range in the Roman slave market was much wider than in any other market for goods. The lowest prices for slaves that Roman sources have recorded are around 500 denarii, which is where the chicken comparison comes in. That sounds like a lot, but keep in mind that a good horse cost 500 to 600 denarii, a mule costs 400, a working ox costs between $300 and $500. Prices could drop below what a reasonable Roman would pay for good livestock when there were a lot of transactions with very young children, very old people, or people with serious problems that were known about. Prices could go up to 100,000 denarii or more for the best people, like a well-educated Greek, a trained doctor, or an experienced estate manager. The same market, very different results. It all depended on what category the Roman commercial imagination put you in on the day of the sale. And the day of sale didn't have to be just one day. This brings us to something that the market has come up with that is, in terms of logistics, impressive in a way that makes me feel bad to admit. There was a guarantee with Roman slave sales, a real one, legally binding, with certain rules and conditions. The Edict of the Aedalis set the standard warranty period, 6 months for health problems and 1 year for legal title problems. This meant that if you bought something that wasn't legally available for sale, you had 12 months to come back and dispute the transaction. If a buyer found out about a hidden health problem within the 6-month health warranty, they could go back to the seller and ask for one of 3 things: repair, which meant that the seller had to pay for medical care for the buyer; replacement, which is exactly what it sounds like; or rescission of the contract, which meant that the sale was cancelled. The buyer went back to the seller and the buyer got their money back. Fix, replace, or give back the money. For one person, you have the same choices as you do now when a home appliance breaks while it's still under warranty. This is how the Roman legal system was meant to work. It protects buyers from being scammed. It is giving sellers reasons to be honest about defects instead of having to pay for warranty claims. It is creating a body of case law about human transactions that Roman jurists, who were some of the smartest legal minds in the ancient world, worked hard to develop and improve. Gaius, a lawyer, wrote a lot about the law on selling slaves. Ulpian wrote about it. Paulus wrote about it. These names are in the Corpus Juris Civilis, which is the main document for most European legal systems. Their examination of warranty obligations in human sales influenced the legal reasoning that, centuries later, would shape commercial law throughout the Western world in ways that later legal systems usually chose not to recognize. There were some things that weren't covered by the warranty. Yes, it did. This is the city of Rome. There are always some cases that don't fit. If a good buyer should have found the defect during the inspection but didn't, the warranty didn't cover it. This made buyers want to do thorough inspections, which is why the inspections were thorough. This also made a professional market for inspection specialists, which needed its own set of rules. If the seller had told the buyer about the problem and the buyer had agreed to the terms anyway, there was no way to fix it. Sometimes sellers would list known problems in the sale document and sell at a lower price with a waiver of warranty claims. The document kept track of the disclosure. The buyer had agreed to take the risk. The deal is done. There was also a rule about what would happen if the person being sold knew about a hidden flaw and hid it on purpose during the inspection. The seller seller was responsible for this situation, in which a person strategically hid a health condition to avoid selling or selling for less. The seller promised that the product was what it said it was. The seller and the product were responsible for how the product changed the accuracy of that description. I find this clause very interesting because it contains a small, legally reluctant, and commercially motivated admission that the people being sold had interests, plans, and the ability to act on them. The law did not allow for this in a philosophical way. It made room for it in a practical way, just like you would make room for any change in a business deal that could change the outcome. The system knew that people weren't just things. It was built around that fact without changing its main idea. This is probably the most Roman thing in the whole story. The paperwork was signed and the person changed hands after the sale was finished. Most histories of Roman slavery don't talk about what happened next because it was both very small and very revealing. They got a pileus. The pileus was just a felt hat. It could be conical or rounded, depending on the time and place. It was the hat of freedom in Roman symbolic language. One of the ceremonies that happened when a slave was manumitted or legally freed was giving them a pileus to wear. It was a sign that a person's legal status had changed. In the Roman market, it was common to put a pileus on the person being sold before the sale was final and the new owner took possession, not as a sign of freedom, as a legal sign that no one owned them right now. The sale was going on. The previous owner had given up their title. The new owner hadn't officially taken care of the property yet. During the paperwork for the sale, which could take a few minutes, the pileus marked a legal no man's land between the two owners. The hat that stood for freedom marked the time between two types of unfreedom. I don't have a funny story for that. I just think it's good to know. The collar came after the hat. Not always, not everywhere, but often enough that collars have survived in large numbers and are one of the most studied artifacts from Roman slavery. Some of them have inscriptions and are made of bronze or iron. The writing on Roman slave collars is one of the most direct pieces of evidence that the system made sense. Some read, "I belong to name, return me if found," just like a pet tag. Same format, same purpose, and same basic idea about the relationship between the owner and the owned. Some collars have longer writing on them. One of the most famous ones, which was found in Rome and is now in the Museo Nazionale Romano, says, "I have escaped. Take me. You will get a gold coin when you bring me back to my master Zoninus." A reward, written on the collar, always worn, so that anyone who might need it could always find the bounty information. The Roman system of rewards for returns was made official. Fugitivari, or professional slave catchers, worked as a legal business. They had prices. They were known for something. They put out ads. People who escaped slavery and were caught again were marked as flight risks with tattoos or brands. This had to be disclosed in any future sale under the defect disclosure rules we talked about earlier. In its own words, the system was closed. It had thought of all the ways people might try to get out of it and built responses to each one into the commercial and legal systems. Trying to get away, a bounty system, and a professional service for recapturing people. Caught again, disclosed as a flight risk, having a lower market value, and having a permanent physical mark. Hurt yourself, disclosed as a risk, lower market value, and changes to warranty terms. The system's accounting had turned every human response into a line item. This leads me to the most amazing part of all of this, the part that made me stop reading for a minute and think when I first saw it in the sources. Rome had a way out. Rome freed people at a rate that was very high for the time. Historians believe that by the end of the Republic and the beginning of the Empire, a large number of free people in Rome were former slaves and their children. Some estimates, though these are really up for debate because the evidence isn't complete, say that freed people and their children may have made up a third or more of the free population in Rome itself. This is an amazing number, and it wasn't by chance. It was legal, common, and good for business to free slaves in Rome. Manumissio is the legal process by which an owner freed an enslaved person. They didn't just let them go and walk away. The freed person became a libertus, which means freed person, and was still legally linked to their former owner by a network of obligations called the operae. They owed their old owner loyalty, services, and in many cases, a financial relationship that could last for the rest of the owner's life. The libertus got Roman citizenship in return, full citizenship, the right to own things, the right to do business, the right to marry according to Roman law. Their children, who were born after manumission, were free-born Roman citizens with no legal record of their parents' past. This was an amazing offer for people who lived a long time ago, and it made a strong system of incentives for the enslaved people, because many people had to show their worth in order to be freed. A slave who was very skilled, loyal, productive in business, or personally useful to their owner had a better chance of being freed than one who wasn't. The system had changed the motivation to seek freedom into the motivation to be a better asset. It had made leaving depend on making the system work well, and owners could make money off of it. An enslaved person who had saved up money in a peculium, which was a fund of personal savings that the owner allowed them to keep but did not protect by law, could sometimes buy their own freedom. They paid their owner to let them go free. They paid for their own freedom with money they had made for their boss. After that, they had to do work for their owner under the operae. The owner thought the deal was almost all good. They got paid for the manumission, kept the libertus's loyalty and service obligations, freed up the capital that had been tied up in the person's market value, and replaced an enslaved worker with a motivated free one who had strong personal reasons to keep a good relationship with them. It was a truly complex incentive design and totally horrible, and those two things didn't cause any problems in Rome. They were the same. The Roman slave economy worked in part because people inside it had reasons to make it work, not because those people liked the system, not because they agreed with what it said, but because the system had set up the choices in such a way that for many people, working within it was the most logical way to get the result they really wanted. That is not a recommendation. That is a description of how systems of control that work really well work. They don't need to agree. They only want the other options to be worse. Rome made sure that the other options were worse, and then it set up a very well-organized market around the result. This included warranty terms, disclosure requirements, professional inspection services, and felt hats for the times when owners were between owners. And someone wrote things down, records that are very detailed, can survive a volcano, and last for 2,000 years. Of all transactions, every cost, every flaw that was made public. All claims for warranties. The receipt from Pompeii is still there. You can find it. 625 denarii. Saw, signed, and sealed. The volcano took everything else. The paperwork made it. I told you I would give you the chicken. There it is. In ancient Rome, a chicken cost about 1 denarius. An unskilled worker made between 2 and 4 denarii a day. This means that most Romans who worked could buy a chicken without too much trouble. It was a common item for sale. A person who was at the very bottom of the Roman slave market, old, sick, unskilled, had known flaws, and had shorter warranty periods, could sell for as little as a few hundred denarii. That's a lot of chickens. But in a market where horses cost 500 denarii and trained doctors cost 50,000, this is not a large number. In Ulpian, the Roman legal scholar, there is a line that talks about what happens when the value of a slave is so low that the cost of the legal transaction is close to or higher than the sale price. The paperwork, the witnesses, and the magistrate's fee were all fixed costs that didn't change based on how much the deal was worth. If you sell something for a very low price, you might spend almost as much on the paperwork as you get for the person you're selling. Ulpian's solution to this problem is very useful and fits perfectly with everything else about Rome. He says that in these situations, it might be better to use simpler paperwork procedures with fewer rules. The system worked well with the economics by scaling down. A person whose worth had dropped below the point where full legal paperwork was worth the money got a simpler transaction. The market handled it well. When I think about what makes Rome one of the most amazing and one of the most disturbing civilizations in history, I think about this. It wasn't mean in a way that was random and messy. It was well organized. It was planned out. It had thought about the edge cases, written the rules, chosen the judges, built the platforms, and come up with the warranty terms. The same civilization that built aqueducts that still work, that came up with legal reasoning that still guides our courts, and that built infrastructure that we still admire. That civilization also built an incredibly efficient market for people, using the same organizational genius for the same ends. A chicken costs 1 denarius, for one person 625. A trained doctor costs $100,000. The market had something to say about everyone. It showed those opinions with receipts, and the receipts lived on. The Roman economy works like that. That was it. That was how it worked. And really understanding it, like the numbers, the warranty terms, the disclosure requirements, and the professional inspection services, tells you more about Rome than any number of marble statues or speeches by senators. Rome said what it was with the marble. The receipts show what Rome was really like. Now, I want to give you something lighter now that we've talked about the inspection rules, the warranty terms, and the hat that meant freedom and didn't. Not lighter in the sense of being unimportant, lighter in the sense that the next story is also about Roman women doing something with their faces that needs some explaining, and the explanation is much more fun than it sounds. Poop from a crocodile, put on the skin every day in the morning, by women who could have bought anything else. This is truly unforgettable, so I suggest you subscribe and don't miss the next episode about hidden Rome, which isn't taught in school or history books.